Now, I'm sure you've heard of Old Holland oil paint, possibly one of the best oil paints in the world. But I noticed they also make acrylic paints. Now, if you've been watching my acrylic demonstrations, you would have noticed that Golden Open has been on my palette for quite some time now. They really are excellent paints. I have to admit though, they're quite expensive, and especially if you're dealing with imports like we are down here, lots of extra costs come onto those things. But Old Holland, are their acrylic paints just as good as their oil paints? One thing I've noticed is they're actually quite a good price and a nice size tube. So I've got the primary colors. I've got Ultramarine, Cadmium Yellow Deep and Cadmium Red Light, and supplied by Art Monarchs in South Africa. And this little apron is going to come in handy because I'm going to have a look at these paints and then do a little demonstration painting just using the 3 primaries and titanium white, and we'll see what we can find out. Are these going to be a good alternative to the Golden Open, or maybe something that we can skip? All right, let's have a closer look at Old Holland's acrylic paints. All right, let's have a look at these Old Holland acrylics. First of all, it's a really large tube. How much is actually in here? 60 mils. 60 mils. I've also got my Golden Open and also 60 mils. So just looks like a bigger tube, but anyway, I'll have to take it as the same volume. Now this is Cadmium Red Light, Cadmium Yellow Deep, and that's Ultramarine Blue. Now first off, the texture of the paint. It certainly has a beautiful, vibrant, deep color. Cadmium deep yellow, and it looks like it is certainly playing the part there. Also, the paint is not too soft. You can see it sits up. It's quite thick, but very usable straight out the tube. And that is what I'm looking for. I don't want something that is soft and runny, and I don't want something that I need to mix water into to make it usable. Typically, that shouldn't be the case with acrylics, but you want it to have that sort of soft buttery texture. The Cadmium Red Light also looks beautiful and vibrant. Nice texture to it. You can see it's not too soft, but will work great straight out the tube. And I suppose the ultramarine is pretty much the same thing. So what I want to do is put some of my Golden Open acrylic, Cadmium Yellow Dark, down as well, and let's have a look. And you can see quite a difference, isn't there? The Old Holland is a much deeper yellow, and that is actually quite strange. Let's have a look at the ultramarine, because I think for some reason the Golden Open ultramarine looks darker, and I thought that straight away. It's almost like the Old Holland ultramarine is definitely slightly lighter than the Golden ultramarine. I'm not sure if you can see that on the camera, but it's very odd. So how do these compare? With the palette knife, I get the impression that the Golden paint is just slightly smoother. Of course, the Golden will stay drier for longer because it's the open version of the acrylics. Does this mean that the Old Holland acrylics are anything less to go by? Well, they certainly are a bit cheaper price-wise, so that is a plus. Let's just have a look. Put this Golden Cadmium Yellow Dark down there. And then the Old Holland. I definitely feel there's definitely a slightly thicker consistency to the Old Holland compared to the golden. As you can see, a deeper yellow. Let's compare these two. Ultramarine for Old Holland, ultramarine for golden. Very similar, but just a degree or so darker. Let's get some of this Old Holland and the ultramarine and mix up a warm green, golden. And you can definitely see that because the golden is a slightly lighter yellow, it makes a slightly greener or cooler green, and the Old Holland a slightly warmer green. I'll put a little more yellow. Still, that difference remains. It's going to be slightly warmer. This is a bit more of a cooler green. Well, let's do one more little mix. Red and some of that Old Holland. Warm violet. Let's put a bit of yellow. Get a yellow ochre. Well, I think the Old Holland certainly looks like vibrant colors. The cadmium's very strong. Compared to the golden, it's hard to say. The ultramarine for the golden, I seem to prefer that one because it's got a deeper blue leaning more to a purple. And the Old Holland ultramarine, not a massive difference, but it almost seems to want to lean to a slightly cobalt deep as well. It's made it beautiful. The Old Holland's made a lovely golden ochre here, so I think I definitely am going to have to do a painting and put this Old Holland to the test and see what we can get just with these primary colors. Okay, so that's given me some insight into the consistency of the paint. But now let's try it out in a painting demonstration. And because I'm just using the three primaries, I'm going to be mixing a few colors as well, like burnt sienna or yellow ochre. We'll see how it goes. And also having to work out some color temperature shifts just with these primaries. So it'll be interesting from that point of view as well. Right, so as I put out the primary colors, I'm also showing you the reference I'm going to use there, which is basically a village lane with some shadows and a bit of light. Lovely little scene. So I've started a sketch of this on some 300 gram paper, and I'm going to start blocking in the dark shapes. Ultramarine, bit of Cadmium Yellow Deep, touch of red if necessary. No white paint in the shadows. I'm using a 1-inch brush and very little water if any. So painting on a piece of paper like this, basically watercolor paper, cold press. It's quite a rough and absorbent surface, so I need to just be patient, build up the layers. Here I'm going to start with the shadows. Nice shadow pattern in this painting, quite an important part of the painting, so we'd put that in. Now if you want to watch this entire demonstration, it's just over 40 minutes, and I'm going to have that in my short course. It's called How to Paint Beautiful Landscapes in Acrylics, the Master Lessons, and I have several extended demonstrations in that course, and there's a link with a special offer for you in the description below. In this video, I'm going to focus on the blocking in and show you the final result, but it will give you a good idea of these Old Holland paints in action. And you can see so far we've built up a nice strong shadow pattern, dark value shapes, which is going to give the painting a lot of interest, especially because these darks are going to make the lights really pop. And it's those lights that we're going to explore the range of this very limited palette of color. Of course, it's another interesting part of this entire lesson and demonstration that I will go into, and that is how to work with such a small palette of colors. And here, getting in the first bit of the light against the shadow, pushing the warmth of the paint, the color temperature, a little more, because I like to bring in an expressive side to my landscape painting. It's often said that I paint very ordinary looking scenes and make something more out of them. I think that really is the duty of a landscape painter. It's not all the time we get to paint a scene that is so incredibly stunning in nature, and if you do, let's say a fantastic sunset, you generally are going to have to focus on some part of that and make some changes. Otherwise, it's probably going to be not an entirely satisfying result, because who can really make a sunset look better? We always say, let nature be your guide, and then bring in your artistry, bring in your emotions, bring in something about yourself. And I think that is the art. That is what makes it a work of art. So as you can see, the blocking in stage is a fairly rough placement of shapes. Light and dark shapes, warm and cool shapes. And we build the painting up. Starts off quite blocky, like a very small image file that is all pixelated, and now you're just blowing it up and getting these blocky shapes, and as you develop the painting, the pixels get smaller and the painting takes some shape, and you decide where you're going to stop. So now this is the latter stages of the painting, quite a bit of finessing of shapes to bring a bit of spark and individuality to this painting. Adding that figure, I'm going to sign it off, get the tape off as well, and we'll look at the final result. And as I said, the extended full-length demonstration is in the link below to that course of mine on master paintings in acrylics. Check that out for yourself. And in the meantime, let's have a closer look. And all in all, I'm pretty happy with the result and how these paints worked out. Well, I have to say I enjoyed this little painting, and it was a nice challenge just to use the 3 basic primaries. And I think there's a nice range of color mixes, nice range of color temperature. Now, what about the paints themselves? Well, as I've mentioned, I've actually quite enjoyed using them. They are certainly very vibrant, and I think as a student grade paint, probably a bit on the upper level there. Certainly you could use these professionally without a problem. For me, there's one little thing that's missing. I just like to make them last a bit longer before they dry out. And I guess that is where the Golden Open Acrylics has spoilt me a little. And it just has that extra workability for longer periods. And you can even go into the next day and your paint will still be usable. So what I would suggest with this, if that is important and you want your paints to just remain workable a bit longer, in this case adding a medium that's going to slow down the drying of the acrylics is going to be a good option. However, if you want the quick drying ability of the acrylics, then I think these Old Holland acrylics are actually great value. In fact, the price is extremely reasonable for the amount of paint you're getting. And if you're in South Africa, Art Monarchs will be the place to go, and you can find all the Old Holland paints there. Right, I also want to mention, don't forget your free subscription to the Create Art magazine. There's a link below and you can get your subscription there for the digital edition at no cost. And it's a great magazine. You'll want to check that out. And of course, I have some freebies for you up here. So check that out in my painting school as well. Right, of course, subscribe to the channel. There's lots coming up in the future as well. So we'll see you in the next video coming up soon. And until then, happy painting and cheers for now.